Welcome to the Private Practice Startup Podcast, where we help mental health professionals grow their dream practices and live a life they love. We chat with successful private practitioners, business coaches, and marketing experts, bringing you tons of practice building tips. We invite you to take advantage of our private practice paperwork and our signature marketing e-course. And we have a gift for you. This is the exact methodology we use to create our six-figure private pay practices and have helped many other therapists do the same. Go to privatepracticestartup.com and on the homepage, click the button to download a free copy of your dream private practice playbook. Now on to today's episode.
Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of the Private Practice Startup Podcast. How are you guys doing today? We hope that you guys joined us last week as Kate and I were your guests and hosts as we talked about how to jumpstart your private practice. So if you are in private practice, thinking about going in private practice, or just starting, you'll definitely want to check out this episode. I'm really excited about today's podcast. We're kind of taking a little detour and removing ourselves from the business talk. We're inviting Matthew Brahman, LCSW therapist, founder and CEO of Verve Psychotherapy. And today we're going to be chatting about 3 ways therapists in private practice can modernize masculinity. A little bit about Matthew. Matthew's an imperfect new dad, therapist, and CEO of his private practice, Verve Psychotherapy. You can find his tips on how to balance all 3 when he joined us on episode 259, where we honored dads on Father's Day. So definitely check out that episode. He's always curious and never complacent, especially when it comes to dad jokes. So maybe we'll have to ask him a dad joke before we end this podcast. Matthew, welcome.
Thanks for having me. Listen, I'll say I'm ready for the dad jokes anytime. They might not be so good, but then it wouldn't be a dad joke.
There you go. Exactly. So before we jump in, let's just take a quick moment for our sponsor.
Is managing your practice stressing you out? Try Therapy Notes. It makes billing, notes, scheduling, and telehealth a whole lot easier. Check it out, and you will quickly see why it's rated the highest EHR on Trustpilot with over 1,000 verified customer reviews and an average customer rating of 4.9 or 5 stars. You'll notice the difference from the first day you sign up for the trial. They offer live phone support 7 days a week. So when you have questions, you can quickly reach someone who can help. You are never wasting time looking for answers. If you're coming from another EHR, they make the transition really easy. Therapy Notes will import your client's demographic data free of charge during your trial so you can get going right away. Use the promo code PPS to get your first 2 months for free, or try out Therapy Notes for free, no strings attached, including their very reliable telehealth platform. Make 2021 the best year yet with Therapy Notes.
Matthew, welcome. We're excited to have you. We're excited to talk about this topic. And I know before we hit record, I shared because you were part of our dad's episode, and then we were chatting back and forth, and you were mentioning about coming on the podcast, and you had some really great topics. And today is important for me because, I really love the men in our profession. Men are far and few between. And I think it's amazing the work that you all do, especially with other men. So I'm super excited. So this is just another way to honor the men in our private practice. And we're really excited to hear about this topic. Because obviously Kate and I, we're not experts in this area. So
it's an honor to have you on today, and congratulations on becoming a new dad yourself.
Thanks. I'm super pumped. And, I keep telling everyone, they ask me, how is it, being a new dad? And I'm 8 months in. We've got an 8-month-old beautiful baby boy. And I think it's still true to say sleep deprivation never felt so good. It's definitely the most challenging and most fun job and role and experience that I've ever had in my life. And I didn't always think that I wanted to be a dad, but just like I didn't think that I always wanted to move into private practice. That wasn't a big plan for me early on in my career. But becoming a dad, becoming a new business owner, and tuning into your podcast along the way, it's all been really great.
Awesome. So tell us a little bit about how did you come into the world of being a therapist?
Yeah, so I had some pretty big fall from grace early in my college career where I was just more interested in showing up, hanging out, meeting people, partying, and not really going to class. So believe it or not, I fell from full of promise first semester in college, and I managed a 0.0 grade point average. So it was almost like, how does that happen? You almost have to like try to fail that well, you could say. So, it was a big, difficult challenge for me and my family, and a lot of really upset moments and, self-reflection and looking in the mirror. I decided that I wanted to eventually become a support figure for other young people and get into counseling, and wanted to try and help people kind of avoid some of those mistakes or kind of learn from my mistakes. And, along the way, I had some really great mentors and some good family support, and found my pathway starting with a lot of psychology courses, getting into like abnormal psych and social psychology and counseling psychology. And when I transferred from a community college to a 4-year university, I found the social work program. And for me, I just quickly connected with social work and the values and the commitment to, serving people who can benefit from having an open heart, ready to be there with them in their worst moments or their biggest struggles and things like that. And so I got into it. I worked for an internship with a prisoner reentry program, and that just set me in a pathway of working with like juvenile justice programs, nonprofit agencies, and community mental health, and worked for a while in inpatient adolescent units and child and family mental health clinics, and found my pathway into private practice.
Very good. And now where have you settled in private practice?
Yeah, so I only opened and started since the first appointment earlier this summer. So I got my PLLC activated at the end of May. I had my first appointment in the middle of June. I'm a couple months in. I'm working, I think my ideal number, probably working with about 20, 25 clients, not more than that, which I want to balance with the dad duties and the house husband duties. Being able to spend time with family is really important to me. So I'm working right now with about 13 clients, a couple scheduled for consultations coming up, and just trying to convert and make sure that I'm living my dream practice.
Nice. And who is it that you mainly serve in private practice?
So along the way, I found that a lot of male clients or male identifying clients were interested to work with me for the sake, I believe, just because I was also, at least on the surface, male identifying to them. As I was trying to find ideal clients and kind of come up with my business plan or niche down and things like that, I thought, I've got this experience of working with so many men, so many young boys, and so many adolescents, and also along the way working with parents. I had a lot of experience working in child and family clinics and coordinating and facilitating parent support groups for their teenagers who were inpatient or in inpatient treatment and things like that. So I got to connect with a lot of parents and a lot of men along the way, and I thought, why not? In general, I know from my own experience how difficult it can be to reach out and ask for help. And, as I found myself at the depths of my valleys early in college, I got connected with a therapist, and, it really helped me turn some negatives into positives. So I wanted to be that kind of support person for, working with men, new dads, and their partners.
Awesome. Love it. So before we dive into the topic, let's just take a quick moment for our sponsor.
If you're a private practice owner, this is for you. Running a business is just plain hard. Endless to-do list, employees to take care of, and your ever-present bottom line. So first of all, kudos to you for staying on top of it. I want to tell you about Gusto. Gusto built an easier and more affordable way to manage payroll, benefits, and more. They help over 100,000 businesses with tasks like automated payroll tax filing, Simple direct deposits, free health insurance administration, 401ks, onboarding tools, you name it, Gusto made it easy. And they really care about the small business owners they work with. Their support team is attentive and helpful. And since money can be tight right now, you'll even get 3 months free once you run your first payroll. Just go to gusto.com/PPS and start setting up your business today. You'll see what I mean when I say easy. Again, there's that 3 months free. Go to gusto.com/PPS.
Thank you so much for sharing your story. And now let's kind of just dive into the 3 ways that therapists in private practice can modernize masculinity. And we'll just kind of let you take it from here.
Absolutely. The kind of first thing I would say is, this kind of comes out of a little bit of a blog post that I had written directly to try to market to men who may be finding me online through my website, through my blog, or through social media. But in general, I was highlighting and thinking about this idea of modernizing masculinity. There's the kinds of harmful or unhealthy traits of different forms of masculinities. And, one that kept popping up for me was like traditional masculinity. And I was thinking also of how, just in general, like trauma-informed treatment would share with us that, trauma can be generational and passed from one generation to the next. So I was thinking of how to modernize masculinity. And of course, like with the kind of third wave therapies that are more mindfulness-based, and thinking also how with, the types of resources that are available through Liz Plank, for example. She's a feminist author and journalist. She wrote a book called For the Love of Men and a New Vision for Mindful Masculinity. So with reading that book and working through a couple other really timely resources, I thought about how important it could be to introduce mindfulness-based approaches with working with gender, which of course many men, they're not challenged or often encouraged to consider their gender and how it impacts themselves. So in general, maybe they're just kind of avoidant of that. And so mindfulness-based approaches to therapy, of course, I think it helps really connect intentionally in the present moment and on purpose without judgment, of course. So I believe that being a pathway to modernize masculinity, making sure that whether we are male identifying or female identifying or non-binary identifying therapists, I believe taking that kind of mindfulness-based approach, I think that's an important pathway to consider.
So I'm so curious as that the men or male identifying people reach out to you, what are they usually coming in for? And then when you kind of share this idea or thoughts or talking about gender and how that impacts them and their ideas of masculinity, like what then do they get? Does that make sense?
Yeah. So what I find is, especially speaking from my private practice journey, even before my solo private practice working in group practice, there's a lot of stonewalling behaviors, a lot of criticism, resentment, those kinds of 4 horsemen Gottman method concepts that, men typically have that sense that they need to provide and protect and be the workhorse of the family. And, it has its maybe time and place and purpose and some value, of course. But of course, I think that many people are coming to me with some irritation, some anger, some discouragement. They're not feeling good enough as their roles as fathers or husbands, especially new dads, and trying to manage that kind of 4th trimester. So I'm finding a lot of young men who are new dads connecting with me saying, hey, I go to hold and try to soothe and feed my baby, and I don't feel like I'm doing it right. Mm-hmm. And so these sorts of, maybe you could say like, just sense of feeling inadequate. And then of course the emotion piece, like, not necessarily knowing what to do with emotions. And so, the kind of what to do with it, I lean into a little bit about the neuroscience of mindfulness. And I like to talk with people of, okay, we're going to, of course, I'm achieving consensus first to say like, hey, like, you sound like whatever plan you had wasn't working out. It kind of sounds like you need a new plan. And, I'm going to offer and introduce this mindful masculinity plan, and we're going to use your brain to change your brain. So I think that talking a little bit about the neuroscience behind mindfulness and kind of understanding that brain as a muscle, we could talk about doing our therapy push-ups and kind of building that positive habit and, developing that muscle memory to slow down and connect with, compassion and self-compassion, and how can we show up in our relationships as fathers or husbands or partners and at work in a way that we prefer.
Nice. Well, so much there. I'm like, as you're talking, I'm like thinking, and, Matthew, you have this beautiful way of being able to step into another's shoes and really understanding their language and giving men their language back so they can understand, so you can kind of guide them on this path. I know that, when we were thinking about having you on the podcast, we checked out your website, which is amazing, by the way. We're very, very impressed with your marketing, but just to further learn and read about the masculinity stuff. And, as you just share, it's like you're speaking men's language so they understand, and you get this buy-in. Like, I know when I was doing therapy, my greatest joy would be that, in a heterosexual couple, the wife or partner would drag, the husband or male in, and he wasn't really sure, but I spoke a lot of the science stuff, right? And in science, logic, neuroscience, men can kind of grasp that. And at the end, I would always tell them, I'm going to invite you back. If you don't want to come, that's okay. If you do, great. And so as I'm inviting, and often the male partner would say, yes, we're coming. I mean, right? It was that realization of being able to speak to both partners, or speak to both sides of us, the emotional side, the logical side, and be able to get that buy-in to really help the couple. It was such a joy. And I just hear how you do that with your clients. And, even as you share, like, a new dad says to you, like, I don't know how to hold my baby right. Like, I just don't see that happen. It could happen with a female therapist, but it's the space of vulnerability and safety that you provide that allows men to show up and get what they need. And I just think it's very precious.
Thanks for that. I agree. Yeah.
Very cool. So tell us, I know that you referenced something about the man box. What is the man box? Tell us about that. It's a loaded box. It's packed tight. That's for sure. In general, I think that kind of metaphor of having a box is super useful and helpful. It's something people can easily understand and grasp. And so, there's a lot of researchers that discuss and talk about the man box, but in general, it's got a lot of very strict rules on what men should be and how they should be and how they should act. And it's repressive and restrictive. And of course, there's violations. So if we're not acting within those gender norms or those gender roles, then, especially other men and women as well, police those men who are not living up to that kind of alpha ideal male standard. So, it's interesting because a lot of men, they don't seek treatment. And when they do, they often don't experience that kind of gender sensitive treatment. And so, like you're saying, me being able to show up and maybe connect with language or connect with, shared experience, it's something that I try to make sure I'm talking about with all of my clients, even if they come up, with, reasons for referral or presenting problems that don't specifically ask me to engage them in discussion about gender and the man box, which I think is also important for me to be doing, talking about like powers and privileges in general, or, examples of oppression, just for therapists to be bringing these ideas into the room, because perhaps, of course, all of our clients are experiencing the impacts of these systems, but they don't necessarily see that as having an impact on their mental health, maybe. So in general, the man box, it's this kind of concept of how
gender is like socially defined and constructed. And, a couple examples is that, men have to be tough. And, there's a documentary film about it's called The Mask You Live In. And it talks with a lot of young men and also a lot of expert men in the field of psychology and self-help and things like this, where, they talk about how the 3 most dangerous words a man receives when they're a boy is to be a man. And, that might have a huge impact where, a young child, a young teenager, from that very early stage of life, they're being told to be tough, be firm, be hard, be strong. So it doesn't really allow much room for any kind of tender, soft, natural core emotions. So I talk with a lot of my clients about how it's not really a part of our male training to experience and sit with and welcome and accept the range of our natural core emotions. And so I can understand why they would want to avoid therapy, how they would want to avoid any kind of emotion-focused treatment. But I also talk about, like you mentioned, speaking their language. It would seem to be something that a lot of men could buy in with, talking about return on investment. And so if I'm trying to, focus on my business strategy, I'm using that kind of language to connect with the man box value of, being good with money and being logical about, if I'm paying money to see a therapist, I need to be getting that return on investment. So, in some ways, I try to find the treasure and leave everything else behind. So I kind of work like a pirate in that way.
I like that. Yeah, it's so interesting. Awesome. As I'm listening to you, Matthew, I'm listening kind of with, multiple brains working here. I'm listening as the therapist brain, the practice building coach brain, and then also the mom brain, because I have 2 boys. I have a 6-year-old and an almost 2-year-old at home, and wanting to make sure that, as a mom and as I'm instilling these messages and beliefs, that I'm navigating that so cautiously. And a lot of this is on my mind often, and how I approach things. And even with my son this morning, my 6-year-old went to the dentist and he had to get a cavity filled. And he wasn't able to do so with the laughing gas. And so just those messages of, it's okay to be scared. It's okay to be afraid. And, at the same time, we can be courageous and just giving permission to have that fear and anxiety about a normal experience, and not telling those messages of man up, you got this,
or be a big boy.
Yeah. Be a big boy. And, it's just, the language, it's so, pervasive and so powerful, and just all of the messages that we get taught, and the kids get taught. And to have someone like yourself who specializes in this area and kind of goes in through the back door to help men unpack this in a way that they don't even know that that's, one of the benefits that they're going to get in coming to see you. And I just think that's really beautiful and really special what you offer. And I'm really enjoying hearing your perspective here today.
I love hearing that perspective you're speaking of, as a mother, and trying to shape masculinity and trying to, develop healthy masculinity. And I've had recently, especially some bigger conversations with my mother, and, she's, sharing with me, like, I hope I didn't hurt, or I hope I didn't harm. And I'm sitting here thinking of, like I mentioned earlier, about like generational and the kind of systems above us. Like it's more than just one individual. Of course we have our part and roles to play. But this is culture, and, trying to break the harmful patterns is some of the most challenging things we'll do, whether it's with gender, class, or race, or, ability, all these kind of aspects of our life that really constrain or kind of interfere with like wellness. And I love hearing that perspective from you as well. And like you're saying, there's so many different hats to it. And, trying as a a client as well, they're also carrying so many different hats. So I think I like how you're saying it's important to come from different angles.
Mm-hmm. Nice.
What else do you think is important for us to touch on today? As we start to kind of wrap up our conversation here, what do you think is the most important thing that you would want our audience to take away from your message here, Matthew?
Yeah, I would say definitely that we need more compassion and self-compassion. Anything that I'm reading or focused on trying to take away from these voices of influence in this kind of mindful masculinity world, it's that we're enough no matter what we've been told, and we've got that kind of inherent worth and dignity. One thing that was helpful, my pediatrician told me during one of our regular checkup appointments about our newborn son was, he's only competing with himself. And for me and my wife, that just lifted a whole bunch of stress off our shoulders. So I would say that as a client, as a therapist, as a husband, as a mother, parent, private practice builder, whatever it is, we're only competing with ourselves.
Nice. And Matthew, as we begin to wrap up, one of the things that I've been thinking about and going back to the curiosity of when you introduce gender and man box and all these things, what are some of the common ahas your clients have?
I would say this is so fresh in my mind because I was just working with a client this week who, I was talking with them. They said, I've got a lot going on. I'm trying to take care of this part of my life while at the same time taking care of this stress. And I'm feeling very overwhelmed. And I was working with them on an experiment of giving compassion to themselves. And they noticed up front how resistant or kind of how difficult and challenging that was to actually give compassion to themselves. They were able to visualize and imagine comforting and caring for someone else. But when I encouraged and directed them to kind of take in that compassion towards themselves, they said, how they noticed first so much resistance, which in general is kind of like a buzzword I don't like to use in mental health treatment anyway. But that was their word. And, they said, I noticed as I kept kind of practicing that mindfulness exercise, so deep breathing and, kind of noticing that they eventually felt more calm and they were able to kind of receive that compassion.
Nice. Well, I've enjoyed listening to you share. I've enjoyed this podcast. I've enjoyed this topic. I greatly appreciate the work that you do and all the men that are in our profession do, especially with other men. I think it's so very important and so very needed. What do you hope our audience takes away from your message today, Matthew?
I would hope to have people be able to just slow down. I'm thinking of how Ferris Bueller's got some really great idea to share towards the end of his movie. He says, life moves pretty fast, and if you don't slow down, you might miss it. So paraphrasing Ferris Bueller, but with mindfulness-based approaches to therapy and especially with a lot of men, they want to get in, they want that laser focus, solution focus, help heal me, change me now. So I try to think with people about how it's a marathon race, not a sprint, and we just need to slow down.
Nice. Well, thank you so much for being here. I know you have a lot of great resources. What's one of the resources that you wanted to share with our audience?
Absolutely. I am following each and every episode of a new podcast by Justin Baldoni and his co-hosts Jamie Heath and Liz Plank. It's called Man Enough. Justin Baldoni recently wrote a book called Man Enough, Undefining My Masculinity. There is so much treasure for any type of mindful masculinity topics in this podcast. They have guests like Glennon Doyle, they have Matthew McConaughey, they have Justin Baldoni's wife, his father, of course, the ever-present Liz Plank. She's really, really great in all of her commentary and perspective. So of course, her book as well, it's called For the Love of Men, A New Vision for Mindful Masculinity. And again, that's Liz Plank. And for the kind of clinical side, there's a workbook. It's actually called Mindful Masculinity Workbook. And I introduce this to all my clients. It's a practical guide for healthy masculinity. It's edited edited by Rocco Kayatos. I'm probably mispronouncing his their names. Forgive me. These resources, super relevant to mindful masculinity. Very helpful. Lots of treasure.
And we'll add that all onto our show notes page. And you also mentioned the Mask You Live In documentary, and we'll add that as well. Thank you so much again for being here, Matthew. It's been a joy and a pleasure. And we hope that you join us next week as we interview Bimabra, talking about how to build your ride or die dream team.
Yeah, Startup Nation, we hope you enjoyed today's episode, and we want to encourage you to subscribe, rate, and review our show. Of course, share with your friends and fellow colleagues. And if there's a topic that we haven't talked about yet in our 282 episodes, wow, that's amazing to think of, definitely let us know, because we want to make sure we're creating this content that meets your needs along the private practice journey. So we'll see you on the next episode. Take care, everybody. Thanks again, Matthew.
Take care.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us on The Private Practice Startup. Visit theprivatepracticestartup.com for awesome resources, free trainings, attorney-approved private practice paperwork, and so much more.